All right. Hello and welcome everyone. So today, before this video, we have a sponsor, and that sponsor is the Ridge. So the Ridge is a wallet making company that makes their wallets out of full metal and elastic construction. And as someone who's been using these wallets for about 2.5 years, they are absolutely fantastic. And I would not go back to any other wallet I've ever used. And I've used pretty much everything: leather trifolds, bifolds, old janky wallets we all had as kids. I've used it all, and this is by far the best thing I've ever used. And the reason for that is because it just carries what you need and not what you don't. You don't need to carry around a million receipts. You don't need to carry expired gift cards. You don't need to carry a bunch of change. This has everything you need. It has two nice metal plates in the center surrounding all of your cards, and that has a cash strap to carry all your cash and receipts, or a money clip if you prefer that. And that's really all there is to it. You have easy access to all your cards that you're regularly using, because you can simply push on the ridge, if you will, to have a very easy access to all your cards by fanning them out and just grab what you need. These are super, super great wallets that I would really advise to anyone, and they come in a variety of styles. Not only the carbon fiber one, which I've been using for the longest time, but also this new forged carbon one, which looks quite nice, as well as this titanium one, which is probably my new favorite and one I'll be switching to. And, of course, because we play Warframe here, I had to grab the nice aluminum rose gold one, which is actually the cheapest of all these wallets that I'm showing here, and is a fantastic deal in my opinion. And speaking of a fantastic deal, you can go to ridge.com/Brozime and use the promo code Brozime for 10% off any of these wallets and help support the channel. Thanks so much to the Ridge for sponsoring this video, and let's just jump in. Okay, and with thanks again to our sponsor, we can get into the Railjack Revisited Part 1 changes. So, we're going to be going over all of the changes to Railjack in this big update. Obviously, many of these are going to be the same as the things that I discussed in the PTS video, because a lot of those changes did just make it over, as many of them were good. But there are some notable changes in here I'd like to go over, and I'd like to take this as an opportunity to kind of go over the whole Railjack system as a whole again, because I feel like it is actually worth doing so now. So, first and foremost, let's jump into configuring the Railjack and talk about some of the major changes that have been made to these systems, starting with the components. So, we have shields, engines, and reactors. Under shields, I want to talk about the valence transfer stuff that has been added. So, I have a piece of wreckage here, and I have the equipped shield array that I currently use here. And you can see this has 412 shield capacity, 3.97 regeneration delay, and then 3.7 shield regeneration per second. And those are the stats of it, plus it has its bonus stat. And then over on this, you can see these are different numbers. Because of that, these are somewhat randomized, and you now have the kind of lich system to valence transfer these things together to get a perfect version of these items. So if I click on this Zeki shield array and then go down here to valence fusion, I can click on this and be able to click on my wreckage. You don't have to repair the items first anymore, which is a very, very notable change from the PTS. But whenever you try and click this to fuse it, it has you go in here and choose what stat you want. So in this case, I would just want this option 1. And then it gives you a breakdown of what you're going to receive at the end. So you're upgrading this one, and this is what you're putting into it, and this is going to be the result. In this case, my item is actually going to hit its shield capacity and regeneration delay caps, but not hit the 6% shield regeneration per second cap. So I can get to multiple of the caps, and the cost for me to do that is actually going to be 40% of what it would cost to actually build this new shield array Mark III. That is honestly not bad. Based on what I've seen so far, because I've done this across actually a couple of weapons, and also my reactor is actually perfect now. It does not take very many weapons or items in general to get to a perfect version of an item. In terms of my reactors, it only took 2. In terms of this Zeki shield array, I think it's going to be the highest one I need, in terms of needing probably 3 of these total, because I have valence fused this once. Unless I, just wait and get a slightly better drop of this in terms of shield regeneration, then it'd probably only take me 2. But this system is quite fair from what I've seen so far. Basically, you're going to be spending 100% of the original resources to repair an item, which is, as you can see here, this is what it is for this particular item. And then on top of that, you'll usually spend another 40% or 80% to get the perfect version of that item, which I think is pretty fair. And personally, whenever I suggested feedback, I only suggested it to be 50% of the repair cost, so that it would end up being 200%, whereas now it's actually 180%, which is even easier to achieve than I've done on many items. So that is very, very good. Moving on, the Vidar reactor, I just wanted to show that, like, I did actually get a perfect Vidar reactor, which is excellent, and is going to be actually very relevant whenever we talk about avionics here in a second. But before we get to that, let's talk about armaments. So, armaments. I kind of want to go over what I have felt to be very good here. So far, impressions on just how weapons are in general. By and large, Zetki weapons are the go-to. All the Zetki weapons that I have messed with so far, which includes the APOC, the Carsonox, and the Pulsars, have been totally serviceable, with the Carsonox being the standout best and the ones that I've been using as my main guns on my Railjack in general. But all those have been totally great, and the Cryophon has been the one that just really fell behind. Whenever the Zetki heat accretion buffs happened, the Cryophon got lowered by a very minuscule amount compared to the 40 to 50% all the other Zetki weapons got buffed, which means the other Zetki weapons, I think, in general, are going to perform the best for all of your slots, basically. So I would really, really advise anyone who's looking to pick a main weapon for their Railjack to choose either the Zetki APOC Mark IIIs or the Zetki Carsonox Mark IIIs, which are both machine guns. They just have some different properties, with the Carsonox being way more rapid fire and having very, very slightly shorter range, and the APOCs having a considerably higher range but a lower rate of fire, but also higher crit chance. And also worth noting, my Zetki APOCs here are a perfect fusion. This only took 2 weapons, the first one I built, and then 1 fusion into it, so I have that plus 60% fire rate. It is highly worth noting that all weapons, so Zetki APOC Mark III, this type of weapon will always have fire rate on it. So you can't move over something like this, where it has just like plasma damage. You can't take that effect and put it onto this weapon. This weapon will always have fire rate. So just keep that in mind whenever you are like looking at weapons, because usually, because the much higher base damage is on the Zetki weapons, these plus damage bonuses don't usually actually matter very much. Anyway, let's talk about the other weapons on here. Side guns, I'm using the APOCs. The Carsonox and APOCs are, like, they're totally fine for side cannons as well as main cannons, which is part of why it's totally fine to try both on the front and see what you like, because whatever else you don't like is probably just going to go on your side guns for your gunners. And then in terms of your lower armament, the Tycho Seeker Mark III has still been like what I've liked most down here, although in fairness, I don't use this a huge amount. Avionics. So, Avionics received some further buffing since the PTS. A lot of the costs on these Avionics were reduced so that we can more readily fit a greater amount of them. And as you can see, I still have 4 Avionics capacity left over, but not a great ability to fit much more in here. But there's a lot more in here, and a lot more relevant stuff is in here than I had before. First of all, in terms of the Battle Avionics, Munitions Vortex actually did not receive the nerf that it had on the PTS. Munitions Vortex remained as is and is incredibly useful, and received a nice visual update, so it is actually much easier to tell where it is at any given time, so you can line it up and kill a ton of enemies with it, usually enemies that are trapped in Void Hole. Particle Ram. Particle Ram right now does have a flickering bug, but that doesn't affect functionality at all. It's just like very hard to look at for people that are not piloting the Railjack, so hopefully that gets patched up soon, and I really expect it will be. But outside of that, the Particle Ram did receive a buff. It does do more damage now, and that makes it extremely deadly in both Saturn and Earth, but not quite good enough to just ram through enemies in the Veil. However, this is still extremely useful for gathering resources, and is the de facto thing you really, really want to use if you're going to be farming titanium on Earth, which is kind of the main strategy for getting titanium. Also, speaking of titanium, just while we're on the subject, they tripled the gains of titanium, so that previous bottleneck that we've had has been much reduced. I've not run into a titanium shortage since I started playing again, and that has been extremely, extremely nice. Void Hole. Void Hole did retain its nerf, but it is still quite strong and is what I'm generally leaning towards in terms of the third ability. However, they did go ahead and buff Seeker Volley. Seeker Volley is quite good as a tool on Saturn and on Earth. It absolutely decimates on Saturn and Earth, so if you're going to be farming there, I would suggest you equip Seeker Volley over Void Hole, actually. But it usually is going to go with the, what is it called? Sort by Drain. With the Warhead Avionic, because this ordnance damage increase does affect the Seeker Volley. So keep that in mind. If you're going to be using it on Saturn, that is going to make it instant kill most of the regular fighters if you have the 2 Avionics equipped simultaneously, and is what I would suggest for farming on Saturn. Moving on, though, Just kind of the general integrated avionics that I'm using. Bulkhead, you want to have a ton of health. Hull Weave, a ton of armor to go with your ton of health. Great. Hyper Strike, more turret damage. You absolutely must have this mod. Thankfully, it's considerably easier to acquire now, as far as I know, with how the drop tables have changed. And then Section Density and Predator are your crit mods that are just going to go in so you do more damage. And Polar Coil, which is going to make it so that your turrets build up even less heat than usual. And this is going to make it so you can have continuous fire for extended periods of time, and that's fantastic. These 6 avionics, I would say, are basically absolutely required at all times, and I don't think there is any room to remove any of these 6. These are must-includes on your Railjack. With that, though, I am using Conic Nozzle, which just increases my speed a bit. This might get dropped once I get a better engine, or it might just become more important once I get a better engine. Haven't seen that yet because my engine at current is a little poor. And then I'm using Hyperflux for just more flux energy. This just allows me to, at the beginning of a mission, have a very high flux energy payload, so I can use my abilities pretty freely throughout the mission, and then just recharge it at the end of the mission. Not vital, but is very nice and convenient, especially if you're going to be spamming Seeker Volley on one of the lower level missions. And then in here, this is just kind of a filler mod because I'm actually missing one of the avionics that I really want to try, which is the avionic that increases your speed by a great amount whenever you are not near enemies. But for now, I'm just using Ordnance Cheap Shot, which just gives me like a 50% chance to not consume munitions whenever I fire my Q, which is just the homing rocket. Then in terms of tacticals, I'm actually able to fit a couple tacticals here. I have an unranked fire suppression, which just puts out one fire. This costs like a small enough amount that I just threw it in here because it seems like it'll be convenient in some cases. Very much not needed at all. And then I have Death Blossom here. So Death Blossom, I have used very, very sparingly, as in most cases at this point it is not required because the heat accretion has been lowered a significant amount to be manageable just on your own. But it still seemed like it deserved a slot down here while I have the points for it. If I find something that is more useful that I'd like to slot instead, like something more expensive than Ordnance Cheap Shot here, I will probably remove this, but it is definitely a good tactical to shoot for as far as I have seen. So that is pretty much what's going on with the avionics. I think these are like considerably easier to acquire now. Things are a lot easier to understand now because there are very, very few versions of the different avionics now. So we only have like the one bulkhead, and we only have like... We have the one hyper, or rather we have the two. The hyper strike is one that we have 2 of because this is one of the starter avionics. The only 2 different types of avionics we have now are the starter basic ones that only have 1 rank, and then you have the full power ones. There are no other versions anymore. There's not like 3 or 4 versions of every single avionic now. They've condensed that down to be much more understandable. So if you get a hull weave, it is going to be the hull weave you're looking for. I found that to be a great improvement. Moving on. In terms of payload, there's a Forge All button for anyone that wasn't informed. This is extremely useful. I do wish there was a setting here where after every single mission, this Forge All would just happen, because I think the investment in terms of resources is low enough that you should just enter every mission with all this stuff remaxed, because there's really no reason not to. Or maybe just like give it some kind of cap where like it only happens whenever you're at like 9/9s, or some kind of thing to make it so that it's always filling this stuff up for you would be much appreciated. And then besides that, let's talk about intrinsics. So as you can see, I actually have, if anyone remembers that I was at 10,999, I actually have farmed up a full another 10 intrinsic plus about 100 other intrinsics. Intrinsic rates were doubled, which is of big help. And based on my testing on the PTS versus the live version, it actually feels like they were increased maybe a little bit more, which has felt really nice overall. This allowed me to get to MR29 because, for those that don't know, each of these trees from 0 to 10 contains 15,000 MR. So there's 60k MR here in total for all 40 ranks that we can get so far. And there's going to be another 15k for the command intrinsic whenever that comes out. But yeah, this has actually been not a bad experience getting these intrinsics. And that is because the Railjack is fun to use now. And that's a wild thing to say considering the state it was in prior, but I do legitimately think that Railjack is actually worth playing now, because you just are an effective fighter. And on top of that, it's more active with being able to give you the rewards out of the mode. And what I mean by that, I'll get into whenever we go over the missions here in a moment. So from the missions, a few things to note. Starting off with a Railjack that has nothing on it. Starting off on Earth, where you start from the posit cluster, guns feel fine. Feels good. Feels absolutely reasonable to play. I think it's even totally reasonable that you could solo stuff. So that is fantastic because the beginning stuff feels good and not like you should just jump out and start using your Archwing. Great success on DE's part from that. From there, though, there is a slight skip and a jump in terms of going from Earth to Saturn to the Veil. I still think the optimal strategy for anyone who wants to get their Railjack built up is to completely skip Mark 1 weapons and Mark 2 weapons, which drop on Earth and Saturn, of course, and to just join someone else in the Veil to get some Mark 3 weapon and component drops, and just try and build those, and do not even bother with trying to build the Mark 1 or Mark 2 items. Because it's just not that much more resources to build the Mark 3s, and those are the ones that you're going to be sticking with for the foreseeable future. So I think that is just a smarter investment of your time as it stands at current. Also, worth noting, a couple of farming spots here. We have the posit cluster. This is where I go to farm titanium because it is the lowest level thing, and you just like clear it super, super fast. And then you just fly around and collect all the titanium. This node is very good for that. And then worth noting, Corm's Belt. This is always going to spawn one of the big ships that you can invade to get some of those weapon blueprints that are available in Railjack. So that is notable here. And then moving on to Saturn. The only thing that's really notable on Saturn is that Cassio's Rest is similar to Corm's Belt in that that is going to give you the big asteroid base to invade if you're looking to do anything there. And then in the Veil, one of the big notes here is that the anomaly, which you can see flashing here, is now always available, which is a huge improvement over its sporadic availability from before. It just rotates from point to point every half an hour now, which is fantastic. I have been doing most of my gameplay on the Ruse Warfield just because this is the highest level and I wanted to see how things perform. But yeah, good stuff all around here in terms of like actually being able to get to the anomaly and go and do those things and like farm the anomaly for the shards and then get the rewards from the shards by trading those into Little Duck. That stuff has actually all been very fun. Now, moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about Archwing because Archwing has been significantly improved, and we're just going to talk very briefly about it. So, first and foremost, the Amisha is still absolutely what you want to use. I think this may change, but I honestly, hopefully not, whenever they like break apart all the Archwings and then turn them into kind of like modular bits. I don't know what's going to happen when that stuff comes out. We'll have to wait and see. But for now, the Amisha is still the King Wing. None of the other Archwings offer anything of value over what the Amisha offers. And honestly, none of the... Even if the Amisha didn't exist, it wouldn't really matter what Archwing you are because all their abilities are pretty much completely lackluster outside of, I guess, maybe the Odonata's one, but even that's kind of a stretch. So, Amisha, still the absolute king on the block. Besides that, we have the Velocitus and the Imperator Vandal. So this is what I've been using on the Velocitus. This build feels actually really, really good in space. This is one-shotting fighters. It feels like a real-ass gun to just take enemies down. The hip fire is totally fine for killing enemies. It just feels solid, which is wild considering arc guns were in a very poor place before. I will say, in general, we have moved completely away from what initially was just like status, use only status, and moved into crits being what's important from your arc guns. So if you're still on like status heavy train, I would highly encourage you to try crits as they seem to be working much, much better. And the two weapons that I found to be quite good for that are the Imperator Vandal and the Velocitus. And then besides that, arc melee, I'm still in the process of forming arc melees out and like trying them. But in general, the tracking is okay, but I really wouldn't bother to use them over using just my arc guns in general. So with that, that is kind of what's up with Railjack. We are going to go over a few other things, I think, but we're going to cut to some gameplay so you can just kind of see me playing it out, and we'll talk about some more things over that. So I'll see you in a moment. All right, so for this part of the video, we're just going to roll Jan Point solo, just because I want to show kind of some of the damage model changes in, like, basically just depth as it were. So you guys can get a feel for what you can expect for a fully maxed out Railjack in terms of its damage output. And I'll also do probably a little bit of Archwing here so you can see how that is performing. And I'm going to be using the Velocitus and the Amisha for that. On our main guns here, we have the Carsonox. And I'm using Void Hole and Munitions Vortex, which have been performing quite well. Also, we are going to turn on the Particle Ram, even though it's not going to make much of a combat difference here. In terms of main guns, I think you'll see that they perform quite a bit better than they did prior. And even on the PCR, I would say this is slightly above where it was there. They didn't really say they were making any like further obvious changes to how damage was going to be dealt, but I think it's pretty clear just from feel to me that between this and the APOC, which I did use on the PTS, there are some pretty significant further changes that they've made just because the kill times just feel even better than the PTS did. That could just be due to my aim being slightly better because I've been playing more Railjack than usual since the PTS, but I would say that it just literally feels better overall. In terms of boosting around, your base boost speed was decreased, but boost sliding, which is what you're going to be seeing me do to get around most times whenever I need to maneuver, was not really affected. Boost sliding is still very, very fast, so it makes the piloting intrinsic actually quite a bit more valuable to have. So if you have that, you're not really going to notice much of a speed decrease there. We're just going to use a Void Hole to clean these boys up. Get rid of all of them. Clean up this area. Void Hole does last less time, but because the change to Munitions Vortex did not go through, it has actually plenty of time to clear out those whole vortexes. And as you can see, we're actually over halfway through the fighters at this point. So I'm actually just going to show taking down a cruise ship real quick. One of the things about the cruise ship that was made a thing is that you can shoot all their engines off and then they can't shoot at you. But something that is very worth note, if you leave one of their engines on, or all the engines on, if you have a second person piloting with you, and you shoot one of their active engines, it does considerably more damage. You can usually one-shot these ships, even in the Veil. So that's just a tip. If you're going to be having someone piloting the big gun on the bottom for the dome charges, they can actually kill even the Veil cruise ships now. You just have to actually hit like a critical shot on their engines while they are still on, so you can't fully disable the ships in order to get those instant kills, which I think is fine in terms of it being more valuable to work together with someone as opposed to fully disabling the ship and then pelting it with a few dome charges to get rid of it. But yeah, we're gonna take out this other cruise ship here, which, you know, is boosting around it and such with the new mobility stuff. And I want to just say again that I actually don't have like what would be considered probably like the optimal engines for this. There is a much faster engine that I could get, and there's actually one I think is actually the slowest of the ones I could get, but it's just the only one I have for right now. There we go. That one's down. And then now we will jump out and do some... We're gonna get rid of this first.
Alert. Enemy cruise ship on scope.
There we go. Get rid of that fire first, and then we're going to show some Archwing stuff. So, Velocitus, it fucks. I just want to put that out there, just right off the bat. The Velocitus kind of fucks. It's really nice feeling to be able just to, like, just pop a shot at these fighters and just have them die, as long as you can hit them. Unfortunately, I'm making bad work of that right now. But it is super, super convenient to be able to actually deal damage to them. And as you can see, the hip fire is also not bad. Well, the Outrider is a little bit tougher. Yeah, the hip fire shots do about half the health of these regular fighters, which I find to be more than fine personally. You can charge from the hip as well. Also worth noting, I'm using critical focus on this build, so I actually don't get full damage unless I'm fully zoomed in. And this is without using the Amisha's slow, which if you're using the Amisha's slow, things become considerably easier for obvious reasons. Yeah, so arc guns can like actually do work now. You can build an arc gun that does respectable damage against these Veil fighters, which is honestly just fantastic. The Velocitus performs similarly, but just if you want like a machine gun feel, I was quite happy with that whenever I was messing with it. And like it's just good stuff kind of all the way around, honestly. So anyway, we're going to jump back in here because I think you've gotten a pretty good feel for how this is going to work. Also, our Railjack is doing a little bit of a hurt. We're just going to put out one of those fires there.
Flames extinguished.
And we have a little electrical thing down here. Also, one of the things worth noting between these like fires and electrical stuff and these breaches, you can actually only have one of each different kind now. So it's much, much more manageable. You're not going to have like 50 bajillion breaches all over your ship now. You're not going to feel like you're flying a paper airplane anymore. And those breaches have been made less frequent, as well as boarding parties having been made less frequent. So it's actually much more viable as long as your Railjack is maxed out to be able to solo these missions, which is very nice. Especially because like the combination of Void Hole and Munitions Vortex is still quite good. Yeah, one with shields on him. Yeah, the increased maneuverability has been extremely nice, though. Not sure if I can do it at this angle. Oh, we got him. And I do think we need to do a repair here.
Cruise ship.
Maybe not.
Reading large translation signature.
They're just enemies on board or something.
The enemy have reinforced.
We're just a wee bit damaged. Not a big deal. If any large breaches and stuff come up, we have the stuff to repair them. And then, basically, I'm just going to save you guys the trouble of, like, rolling out the rest of this mission. It's just the cruise ships left. I think you guys have a pretty good idea of how Railjack is performing now. Obviously, with the larger crew, it would be very easy for someone just to Archwing over to these other ships and stuff and just take them out just, you know, the regular way. I will say, as, like, going solo, if you just destroy all the engines, because they can no longer fight back when you do that, because it disables their weapon systems, it is very easy to use the Railjack to take out their engines and then simply fly over very daintily and just jump on. Also, as a bonus, whenever you destroy the engines, it also kills half of the available crew. So whenever you jump on here after that, there's going to be way fewer enemies for you to encounter on the ship proper, which is also, of course, helping with your ability to solo these missions. So these missions are quite soloable now, although I will say they are actually very much more enjoyable with a group, whenever people can, like, actually divide their attention and do multiple things and take out multiple cruise ships. And, like, the Railjack can be, like, mainly fighting large swarms, and the Archwings can be fighting, like, single target enemies. It actually all comes together in a way that's really satisfying and honestly not what you'd expect from Railjack, given how it's been up until this point. It's really nice that it is just kind of a thing now. Like, it's a real game mode, and the boosted credit rewards in the Veil certainly don't harm either. As a way to get a somewhat reasonable amount of credits, albeit not extremely quickly, but it's much better than nothing. But yeah, that's kind of Railjack Revisited, or at least the important bits right now. It's really nice. I can't wait for them to do the part 2, which appears to be a thing that's going to be going over the intrinsics and such. I'm really excited to see what they do with that, as like the actual intrinsic tree itself is one of the main places that there could still be, I think, lots of improvement. But yeah, that's going to do it for me. I will see you guys later. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video, and thanks again to Ridge for sponsoring this video. I will see y'all tomorrow.